everybody. I'm PJ Kwong for SGS LinkedIn Live, and in today's session called Our Journey, EPA 1633 Development and Future PFAS Methods. As the title suggests, we're going to be talking about developments in PFAS detection and the SGS created method that is recommended by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, and future methods to boot. PFAS is one of those things that we hear a lot about and is something that poses global health risks, which means that it's really important to get monitoring and mitigation under control. I have two subject matter experts today to help us figure out why not only PFAS are such a big issue, but why the exciting work being done by SGS to discover and monitor these contaminants. My first expert is none other than Dr. Bharat Chandramouli, who's the senior scientist and North American Environmental Laboratory Product Manager. Bharat leads the development of new products and services for his laboratory group in North America and helps clients solve their environmental measurement challenges. Bharat, thank you so much for joining us. And how about you tell me a little more about yourself?
Hi, PJ. It's good to see you.
You
As
too.
PJ said, I lead product development across our environmental labs in North America, and I've been working on emerging contaminants since the early 2000s. And so on PFAS since 2008 or so. Really love talking about the PFAS work we've done in the past 15 years. And really looking forward to chatting about all things EPA 1633.
Well, I know if anybody is able to sort of break it down for the more simple-minded people like me, you are one of the people I can turn to for sure. Our next expert is Julia Roth. Julia is the SGS North American Air Services Portfolio Lead for Industries and Environment. Julia works with clients to develop project-specific solutions that may involve remediation, industrial hygiene, fence line monitoring, emissions, and specialty air sampling and analysis. Thanks for joining me, Julia. How about you give me a little bit more about your backstory?
Hi, PJ. Hi, Bharat. Welcome, everyone online. I'm Julia Roth, and I lead our air services for SGS North America. As a leader in the monitoring space here at SGS, we see a lot of interesting projects. But one of my favorite focuses has been working on sampling and analytical methods for PFAS. So I'm excited to talk to you all today about EPA 1633 and future PFAS methods, including future air methods.
That is amazing. You know, I can't wait to get started. And I want to reassure you two that I am a professional after all. And not everybody listening is going to know what the big deal is about PFAS. So before this live, I did a little bit of research. Okay, a lot of research, because PFAS is on everybody's minds, on everybody's tongues, including in popular culture. So I turned to John Oliver and Danny DeVito, who helped me figure out that, I quote, PFAS is quite simply bippity boppity magic.
And when this stuff gets in the water, whoa, that's the real bippity boppity magic. Bippity boppity magic. Bippity boppity magic.
Okay, how did I do, you guys? Do I have it all figured out? Is there anything more I need to learn?
Believe it or not, there may be a little bit more to learn, but I sure enjoyed that segment. I mean, and how well it put the PFAS issue in context. PFAS chemistry is complex, but that segment is a good introduction to the global challenge and the scope of the problem that is PFAS.
What about you, Julia? What did you think?
It's incredible how mainstream it's becoming. It's popping up on Netflix, on John Oliver, and the Biden administration is definitely taking it seriously.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you say that, because as much as I know that SGS has their customers covered, I have heard that the Biden administration is concerned about the prevalence of PFAS in our environment, and they've released a plan called the Biden-Harris Plan to Combat PFAS Pollution, also known as the EPA PFAS Roadmap. So what can you tell me about this, Julia, and why is it important?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, PJ. The EPA has published a PFAS strategic roadmap, and the Biden infrastructure deal includes $10 billion in grants to address PFAS and other emerging contaminants. In addition, the DoD is addressing PFAS at their sites. The FDA and USDA is researching PFAS in our food system, and the Department of Human Health and Services is tracking new data on human health risk. Now, that's just a small list of the government agencies getting involved here. And finally, the reason we're all here, the US EPA released the Draft 1633 method for measurement of PFAS in aqueous, solid, biosolids, and tissues. But we'll get to that shortly.
We sure will. And you know what? I just knew that this topic would resonate with our audience. We're going to take a quick look at the comments so that I can see who's joined us. And I also want to thank our SGS team for putting together a huge number of watch parties across North America. So welcome to all of our watch party participants. Hope you're having a good time. And to everybody else, like these people from San Diego and from Paris. And I see some people from China and also Chad and Egypt. Really, we have the whole world here. And we want to welcome you to this amazing session. So let's get into it a little bit. Bharat and Julia, what is the EPA 1633? It's been such a topic of conversation. Bharat, can you start to fill me in with this?
Sure. So Twitter summary, 1633 is a best practice LC-MS method for the measurement of 40 PFAS in pretty much every environmental matrix other than air. And if you want to take away just one fact from this conversation, listen up now. 1633 is a standardization effort and a continuation of the work of the PFAS measurement community rather than the reinvention of PFAS analysis. As I mentioned, over the last 15 years, we've aligned on a set of attributes that we consider best practice for PFAS analysis. So for example, steps like use of the entire sample bottle and bottle rinsing because PFAS can absorb onto surfaces and can also concentrate on the surface of a sample, which means taking just part of a water sample adds error. Isotope dilution is another best practice where we add a suite of isotopically labeled PFAS to the sample at the beginning of the process to mirror the behavior of your target PFAS from start to finish. And there are many of these best practices, but we may not have time to get into all of them today, but the essential goal is the same. When you're measuring PFAS at low parts per trillion, from the easiest of the drinking water samples to the really messy landfill leachate samples, or biosolids, the best practices are essential for accuracy, precision, and robustness. Consultants and regulators are needing to make complex decisions that take into account water concentrations, soil concentrations, fish uptake, and more. And you want all that data coming from a common method so you, as a data user, can focus on understanding what that data means and how to make those decisions rather than trying to untangle how the data was generated and which of these best practices were actually followed. That standardization is a really big deal here.
So Julia, I'm sure you've got something else to add. So how about you jump in here?
You know I do. If you look at that list of 40 PFAS compounds in 1633, it's comprehensive. It includes all targets in previous EPA methods, including 537, 533, 8327, and adds more PFAS that are representative of certain sources. For example, we have a suite of fluorotelomere carboxylates that are present in landfill leachate samples, as well as a suite of legacy perfluorooctane sulfonamides that were present in carpet waterproofing materials. Previous methods were developed to catch up to the latest research, whereas this method, the goal was to lay the framework for the next decade of routine PFAS monitoring.
Amazing. Okay, so 1633 has been creating quite a stir. Bharat, how did it come about?
Yeah, and as Julia mentioned, the EPA has methods in the books already for PFAS. 537.1 and 533 measure PFAS in drinking water only, nothing else. A screening type method in waters and solids was also added last year, 8327, but there were some limitations noted in the use of that method. And we just talked about this, that standard method and everything else was not there. So all that site characterization, remediation, ambient monitoring, fish uptake was being done using different in-house lab methods. And while these methods have generated very important data, there's always that uncertainty because they're not tied to a standard reference method. And when the EPA brings about an MCL for PFAS or PFOA or Gen X, for example, compliance needs monitoring against a standard method. So there was this big gap, and the EPA started working on this 3-4 years back. With this method, the EPA Office of Water, which manages 1600 series methods, got involved and collaborated with the DoD to get 1633 going. And that is a fairly unprecedented step, that interagency collaboration there. We have worked with the Office of Water on many EPA methods previously for dioxins, PCBs, pharmaceuticals, pesticides, flame retardants, the list goes on. And so they selected us as the best team to steer this method through its extensive validation process. Our senior scientist, Corinne Hamilton, who led this effort, is a pro at ensuring that the EPA's exacting standards on these validations are met and a robust method is developed.
Amazing. Julia, I, of course, don't really have anything to add here, but I bet you do.
So here we are after a year and a half of hard work by many people. The method has passed single lab validation, and the EPA, understanding the urgency, has published the method for labs to use and recommended that labs use it. Of course, there's still some ways to go before everything is final. Multiple labs, including another SGS location, have been selected to perform multi-lab validation, starting now and continuing on into 2022. Once this data confirms 1633 will work beyond SGS axis, the EPA will finalize the method, open a draft period for questions and comments, and move it along the regulatory path towards promulgation, where ultimately it becomes official.
Amazing. So I want to get a little bit further into the details. 1633, as I understand it, is essentially the next step in the codification of best practices. Am I right, Bharat?
Indeed. If you look at the evolution of standard approaches, the EPA process starts with 537. It's a method approved for drinking water only, and it does well enough in drinking water. There was so much actionable data generated from the UCMR3 effort. But it doesn't incorporate many of those best practices that we talked about: use of isotope dilution, weak anion exchange, use of multiple transitions, throw identification, which means it really can't be extended beyond drinking water, which was its original scope. And then 533 comes along from the EPA next, and it brings in more best practices like isotope dilution and additional targets like shorter chain PFAS and a number of the ethers that are important in North Carolina. But again, it's drinking water only. Meanwhile, in parallel, the Department of Defense, a major stakeholder here with a big PFAS challenge on firefighting foam contamination, needs rock solid data. So they work with the lab community and others to come up with a quality systems manual to ensure that even if labs are running multiple different in-house methods, they all have to conform to a set of best practices and can be accredited for them as well. That infamous table B15 is a very successful initiative that greatly increased data quality and availability of PFAS analysis. Now we have 1633, and if you look at the color-coded comparison that was just up recently, you should be comforted because 1633 just builds on the DoD QSM to make a standard method that is applicable to a bigger range of environmental samples, but essentially feels the same as a framework. You can see from that color, right? They are very similar in their approach and what they were trying to do. And it should. To write 1633, we just took our standard DoD compliant method and had to make just a few changes and tweaks to get there. So, continuity, not major change. Continuity and that conformance to best practice is key here. And so it's been fun for us doing that. But Julia, before you joined us at SGS, you were a consultant. From a data user point of view, what was your experience?
That's a good question. The lack of standardization was always a big challenge because it meant that we really had to dig into the individual method details at each lab. The labs would call their method EPA 537 mod or something along those lines. But as you said, 537 is a drinking water method and not meant to be modified to handle more complex samples. So it was always up to the individual method details. Now, the DoD QSM came along, which helped greatly and is a quality framework, but it's not a PFAS method. So there was still some level of uncertainty there. With 1633, the EPA integrated best practices from previously developed methods and expanded the list of analytes to support current and future PFAS investigations. So hopefully this method's around to stay.
Amazing. Okay, I think this leads us to the nuts and bolts of the matter. And if you're just joining us, we're talking about not only Method 1633, but the prevalence of PFAS in our environment and what SGS is doing about it. And we're doing it with our experts, Bharat Chandramouli and Julia Roth. Okay, Bharat, how does 1633 work for all of these different matrix types?
To my favorite topic, chemistry, and always a big topic at home because that's my nearly 5-year-old who is currently obsessed with the periodic table. Don't ask me why, but
we all are.
But anyway, 1633 provides the standard procedures for a whole variety of sample types. So for solids and tissue samples, the process begins with spiking a representative subsample with the isotopically labeled standards, isotope dilution. Then we extract those samples multiple times with methanol that has been modified to a basic pH to maximize extractions of these anionic acids like PFOS and PFOA, and the neutral PFAS as well. With tissues, we use a stronger base and a much longer extraction time to get all of those PFAS into solution. Once in solution, the goal is to make it a water sample by removing all of the methanol. And the procedure for water samples starts there with addition of the label standards spiking. And then the water samples from all of these matrices go through both weak anion exchange cleanup, that is essential to removing many of those neutral and positively charged interferences, and carbon cleanup as well, that can remove dissolved organic matter and some other interferences. These cleanups, as I mentioned, very, very important, especially for complex matrices, like your wastewater treatment plant influents, biosolids, landfill leachates, tissue, really difficult samples. Then off to the LCMS-MS, where these PFAS are measured using tandem mass spectrometry at unit resolution. We measure multiple transitions per PFAS where available to ensure maximum assurance and positive identification. And then, of course, use isotope dilution to provide recovery-corrected data. So, long list of best practices here.
Julia, your turn.
So at the end of all that, we get data that's very similar to what you'd get from a DoD QSM compliant method, but with all the standardization built in and the ability to handle a wide variety of sample types, from a relatively simple surface water sample to a gnarly landfill leachate sample. Now, in going through the 1633 document, I noticed some interesting ways in which 1633 actually differs from a DoD compliant method. Now, Bharat, I'd love to get your take on these differences. For example, the most frequently asked question that we've received is about sample freezing. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Freezing is an interesting one. And as we know, PFAS don't degrade fully in the environment. That strong carbon-fluorine bond and all, and that's indeed why they're a problem. But they can transform into other PFAS due to bacterial action, chemical transformation, and more. And the environmental community has known this for years. There's been multiple studies on this. But on storage and stability, we published a study in 2019 that showed that some of these targets in 1633, they transform very quickly in a surface water or an effluent. The perfluorooctane sulfonamide ethanols, for example, their legacy products from Scotchgard, can transform into the sulfonamido acetic acids within 7 days, even when stored cold, between 0 and 4, which is your standard lab storage temperatures. And we showed through our study over half a year that the freezing these samples completely stopped the process through the full duration of the study, which is half a year. And as part of 1633, we were asked to perform even more stability studies. And the data is not fully out yet. The EPA is still reviewing all of that. That data we generated through the 1633 validation process and the studies we had done previously, those studies are informing this freezing requirements in 1633. And yeah, I mean, you're right. It is a change and one that may entail some adjustment going forward. And for sure, it has been a big topic of discussion in the month or so that 1633 has been out.
And another item I noted as I was going through the method was the use of weak anion exchange and powder activated carbon cleanup on every sample. Now, DoD methods only require the weak anion exchange on aqueous samples, right?
Yes, exactly. And that is, again, due to the need for standardization here. When you're dealing with a challenging biosolid sample or a tissue sample, you need all the extract cleanup in the method to provide consistent data. On fish tissue especially, where that data can make the difference between what fish you're allowed to eat and how much. Inadequate cleanup can result in strange results there. There's been at least a few instances where we've had to rerun samples originally run by someone else because of interferences, and most of the time this consistent application of the methods, weak anion exchange cleanup and carbon cleanup, clears up those issues. Also, when you're looking at water, soil, and tissue data from a site, it is really important that they all have gone through the same process, so the same cleanups, the same methods as it were. So that's why these cleanups are mandatory at this point in time. That powdered carbon requirement you mentioned as well, that is one that is currently in the method. One I expect will change a little bit after the labs have gone through the multi-lab validation. Many labs currently use carbon columns to do this cleanup instead of powdered activated carbon. And there are some columns that might even combine these two cleanups. So there might be some change coming there. But for now, it is what it is.
Exactly, because 1600 series methods are performance-based. So once fully established, labs can validate variations within the method's allowed parameters as long as they meet or exceed specifications. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out over the next year or two. And of course, during multi-lab validation, the method is prescriptive as the EPA runs a tight ship through validation.
Yep.
You know what? I love listening to you two. And you know who else does? Our audience, especially our watch parties. We hope you're having a good time because I know I am. And this is such an interesting exchange of information. So if there was anything else that you wanted to bring up, Julia, what would that be?
Another one of my favorite questions that we've received. Bharat, why the bile acid checks?
Oh, yeah, that's a fun one. Guess who else uses surfactant anionic acids with the hydrophobic tail and a hydrophilic sulfonate group to do cool chemistry? I mean, that's right, our livers and fish too. So bile acids are surfactants that help dissolve fats and oils during digestion, and they're present at high concentrations in livers. One such family of bile acids, the taurine conjugated bile acids, are approximately the same molecular weight as PFAS, and they're sulfonates as well, which means the primary quantitation ion for both PFAS and these bile acids is the same. And the type of mass spectrometer we use, which is a unit resolution mass spectrometer in 1633, can't distinguish between these taurine conjugated bile acids and PFAS. And anion exchange can't remove them either because, well, they are anions just like PFAS is. So if your liquid chromatography method doesn't separate them, your LC method, the PFAS measurement is interfered with and you get poor data quality on PFAS, which was definitely not great at all. So in 1633, and when we optimized our methods as well, we ran these standard checks to confirm that the bile acids were coming off our LC columns well before PFAS, and that way the PFAS measurement is not interfered with, and that ensures good data quality on PFAS. This is why 1633 has these taurine conjugated bile acids checks to ensure that you get good data quality on PFAS. If you're well optimized, you will be fine. And this is something that's been further clarified in a table of clarifications that came out a couple of weeks back from the EPA as well on 1633.
If I can jump in on that clarification table, I wanted to mention that like all methods, 1633 will change and improve in minor ways through the validation process. But here's where we stand today. The EPA has recommended that the method be used by the community while it's undergoing multi-lab validation, understanding that there will be some changes.
Right.
Regulatory agencies, both state and federal, are preparing to move towards 1633 accreditation. So California and the Department of Defense have already taken steps forward. The EPA worked directly with SGS Access, so we have the method up and running there, and SGS Orlando is selected to be part of the multi-lab validation. So hopefully we'll have it up and running there soon as well. I have to say, we're thrilled to support this advancement, and personally, I'm really proud of the entire development team.
Yeah.
You know what? As well, you should be. What a set of accomplishments. I mean, really. And it looks to me like you two could talk about the ins and outs all day long about the method, but there's more. Julia, we've talked a lot about water, soil, and tissue, but what about air? I mean, our audience knows about our hashtag Team Clean Air, but since you're the air lead, what can you share about the PFAS trends in air and what should we be looking for?
My favorite topic.
Okay.
And PJ, you're absolutely right. Most of the focus has been on drinking water and other media so far. Although focus is shifting to air because studies have shown PFAS is present in emissions, ambient air, including Arctic ambient air, and even children's bedrooms. Now, in the past year, the EPA released OTM 45, which is the first PFAS in air method, which looks at stack emissions. If you're familiar with method 23 for dioxins, It's very similar with a front filter, then your sample passes through an XAD, followed by a series of impingers, and finally a rear XAD. And one thing I'd like to highlight here is that we're actually seeing a different set of PFAS in air compared to other medias. We're seeing a lot of precursors, carboxylic acids, basically the neutral compounds that you would expect to see in air. And I know a lot of you are probably curious about vapor intrusion as well, one of my personal favorite specialties. We are investigating some of the tried and true air analysis methods. Likely there will be at least 2 methods to cover both volatile and semi-volatile fractions of PFAS. But the EPA is working diligently on developing those as well, and hopefully we'll have some more information soon.
Amazing. So team, by my, calculation and my calculator, that's 40 PFAS down and only, 5,000 more to go. So how do we even start tackling this measurement challenge? Bharat, I'm going to go with you first.
Oh boy, yeah, I wish we had all the time in the world to talk about this because I could go on forever. But PFAS, as you know, are a class of thousands of chemicals, most of them not characterized, and their health effects mostly unknown. So that's the big debate right now in the community is, do you deal with them one by one, as we've done in the past, and as we're doing in the present, or do you deal with them as a class, as a unified set of PFAS, as it were? We're definitely steering clear of this debate on this particular event, and next time you see me, just buy me a beer and we'll talk. But to characterize this complexity and to regulate this, for example, if you're looking at PFAS in food packaging, like we were seeing on the screen there, how do you know that going PFAS-free in food packaging is something that's been accomplished? There's 2 ways to do this. You can go simple or you can go big. So from a simple point of view, we measure organic fluorine. PFAS is an organic compound containing multiple fluorines, right? So the EPA is working on a method for organic fluorines in a sample based on a measurement approach called combustion ion chromatography. So this is a single number that represents all potential PFAS in a sample. And that intuitively feels very powerful from a decision-making perspective because it's simple, it's a single number. But with that simplicity comes trade-offs, and we will know better how this approach works once it's more established. Lots more to come on this in the coming year.
Julia, I feel that you've got something else to add. I just know it.
Yeah, so on the other end of the complexity spectrum, we have high resolution mass spectrometry, or as I like to call it, CSI PFAS. But in all seriousness, this method did uncover the major PFAS issues in North Carolina. It's a powerful tool that can distinguish between compounds at a 4th or 5th decimal place of mass. And we get these big, rich, multifaceted data sets that we can mine for all kinds of information on unknown PFAS, use it to generate unique source fingerprints, and do environmental forensics. Now, the trade-off, of course, is complexity and the amount of time and money it takes to generate this data. And while instruments are becoming more accessible and easier to use, it's primarily a research tool at this point.
This conversation is just fascinating, not only to me, but to our audience. And we're lucky enough to have had a few questions come in prior to this live. And if you guys are game, I want to pose some questions to you. You ready?
Yes,
ready. Will you be able to perform 1633 on difficult matrices like sludge?
I'll take this one. Absolutely. It's actually part of the method already. SGS Axis and now the labs involved in multi-lab validation are validating samples with complex matrices like sludge and landfill leachate.
Okay, question number 2. Why isotope dilution?
Aha, more fun chemistry, right?
Right.
Isotope dilution is a key best practice in PFAS analysis, and it's integral to good data quality, especially in these complex matrices that we talked about, sludge, landfill leachate. So what is it? We add a set of isotopically labeled standards at the beginning of the process to track and monitor the entire process. So for example, for PFOA, it is a PFOA with 8 carbon-13 molecules instead of carbon-12. It behaves exactly like PFOA through the process, tracking variations through extraction and cleanup, and importantly on the instrument as well. But on the instrument, it provides a distinct signal as it is 8 atomic mass units heavier. Otherwise, it's exactly the same as PFOA, which is really valuable. So if there's minor ion suppression or enhancement on the instrument, or we have losses through extraction or cleanup, both those PFOA and its labels analog are affected equally. And then at data analysis and reporting, that PFOA is always reported relative to its labeled compound. So that measurement is always recovery corrected and has the highest possible accuracy and precision. And also you measure the recovery of these label standards through the process and report it as well. So it gives you a good understanding of the quality of your data. And that isotope dilution is, as I said, really important to getting good quality on landfill leachates, sludges, tissues. Otherwise, your data quality is definitely not going to be as reliable.
Okay, I have a question that I'm pretty sure has Julia's name on it, and that is, will the EPA draft a PFAS air method, and how far down the road are they?
I figured it would be an air question.
Yep.
There is a lot of focus on air right now. The EPA released OTM 45 for PFAS and stack emissions, which is important because atmospheric deposition from stack emissions is a well-documented issue, and this will help reduce that risk. Now, volatile PFAS are also getting a lot of attention, and the EPA is doing research on that currently. I have my fingers crossed that we'll see some new data here published in 2022, but it does take proper time to do proper due diligence.
You know what? I've got my fingers crossed too, if that's of any help to you. Okay, here's our next question. It's a question on the total oxidizable precursor or top method. My goodness, that was hard to say. Is there going to be a version for 1633 available?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question and not one I was expecting. The total oxidizable precursor, as many of you will know, is a way of estimating unknown precursors of PFAS or PFOA in your sample. It acts by oxidizing your sample and measuring the oxidation products, which is your carboxylic acids, which are easy to measure. TOP is not within the scope of 1633 and is not addressed by the method directly at all. That being said, we've been running TOP for a few years now, and in 2020, we revamped the method to align it closely with our internal method and hence 1633 as well. We now report all of the 40 targets from 1633 post-TOP, and though the precursors in some of these ethers will no longer be present post-reaction because they would have been oxidized away. We also incorporated isotope dilution for the carboxylates and sulfonates, the primary focus of TOP. So that what, in the end, all that change in optimization through 2020 means that the post-TOP data looks very much like what would come out of the 1633 method. And what that gives you is a direct comparison for your samples. So the pre-reaction and the post-reaction runs are both using EPA 1633 protocols, and that gives you direct comparisons, apples to apples, as it were, and the best possible data quality on top as well.
You know what? This final question is one that really interests me. I'd like to know, why was SGS chosen to assist with the EPA method development?
Oh yeah, that's something that we've been privileged and proud to be part of for many years. SGS Access is a very unique lab in our network, one that has been working on emerging contaminants since around the time I was born. Really a unique lab in the sense that we have a research focus, and it is in many cases the first commercial lab to get methods up and going for emerging contaminants. So we've worked on PCBs over the years, pharmaceuticals, dioxins, flame retardants, as I mentioned, and standardization for these methods is key. And when the EPA has worked with us in the past on many occasions to get these methods that we have documented for emerging contaminants into the EPA's books as standard methods. So we wrote 1668, for example, for PCBs, 1614 for flame retardants, for pharmaceuticals methods, as I mentioned, and that track record in history has been mostly one of great success. And so on this very important topic, when with the PFAS standardization was needed, the EPA came to us to develop this and validate this because we've worked with them many times before on emerging contaminants. So that's kind of a little history on how that came about.
This is just terrific. I'm going to give each of you a chance to share a final thought. Julia, I'm going to start with you.
First, thank you, PJ. Thank you, Bharat. This has been a really fun discussion. And thank you to everyone who's joined us globally. I know some of our clients in North America hosted watch parties, and we cannot thank you enough for your support. Here at SGS, we provide you a global reach with local resources, and our account managers are here to help you get set up with a wide variety of environmental analysis. I look forward to continuing the discussion and hopefully working with you soon. Bye for now.
All right, your turn.
Yeah, I mean, to echo everything Julia said, it's been such a pleasure and privilege to share some of this with you. We've just scratched the surface here, and I'm sure people listening here have more questions. Feel free to reach out to me, and we'll talk 1633 all day and all evening. If I love doing that. And again, a shout out to our lab who worked so hard on this to get 1633 up and going. An immense validation effort, many samples, lots of coordination, a level of attention to detail that's been unbelievable, and such a multi-stakeholder effort, including our lab, but so many people at the EPA, the Department of Defense. It's just been such a massive team work to get this method up and going to this point, and really looking forward to the ongoing journey here through multi-lab validation and through all the comments and promulgation. Yeah, it's, I'm just the messenger here on 1633. Our team led by Corinne Hamilton just did a phenomenal job. Just looking forward to what the next year brings on this and everything else PFAS. It's so exciting. And
I'm looking forward to following your journey as well. Congratulations to both of you and to your teams for all of this, not just outstanding work, but really important work. This is something that is so essential for us as people. So there's been a tremendous amount of information that has been shared throughout the session. And if you want to know more, there is a QR code that you'll see in just a moment at the bottom right of the screen that you can scan. It will take you to a site and you will be able to ask questions there. You can also visit our website at sgs.com. In the meantime, I would like to thank everybody for watching, and for the teams who put together the watch parties, you have a special hello and thank you for watching. I'm PJ Kwong for SGS LinkedIn Live. Bye for now.
Bye all.